All right, so we are in week 9 now, and we're going to shift gears a little bit different this week for our U.S. history. Up until now, a lot of what we've been focusing in has been on personalities, right? We've had some thoughts about some of our early founding fathers, George Washington, and then Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson. And for historians, there are many debates about how they want to approach certain time periods. Do we focus on men or women as movers and shakers, often men in ancient times, not always, or do we focus on the people on the ground? I always think that there should be a blend of both, right? I mean, if you think about it, the people who loved and supported Jefferson and the people who loved and supported Andrew Jackson and their haters during their own lifetime helped shape the legacy that they had. These are not just characters coming out of a vacuum, and they're coming out of a very specific type of history. And I think it's kind of interesting, we look at Andrew Jackson is one of my favorite guys to teach. Not necessarily my favorite people, but my favorite guys to teach, because he is such an enigma, as so many of you noticed. And I think his story is so interesting, especially for me to draw it back into Northern Ireland and the conflict between Protestants and Catholics that still exist in Northern Ireland, and then coming from Northern Ireland, originally a descendant of a Scottish settler family, and then being a settler family here in the United States, and here to have this young boy grow up in this violent time against natives, against fellow settlers, against diseases and sickness, and then to fight. And I think that sometimes we also forget about these factors. I don't necessarily think we should always excuse bad behavior because of bad circumstances, but it does help us. I think there's something there to that. I mean, would we have ISIS in the Middle East if there wasn't already all these wars that were going on before? I don't think that there would have been. I'd make a strong argument of that case. And you can look at many different societies in which the traumas of previous events create people who, what kind of leadership is going to rise up in a tough environment? They're tough people, right? And so this next section that I'm going in is kind of just discussing more or less like economic development, things that might seem kind of boring to some of you, the issue of factories and farming and immigrants, but it shouldn't be boring. And especially this section is so relevant to today's issues about immigrants. I mean, we know, I don't want to be partisan on this, but Donald Trump has made it an issue about something that's not just been something that he made an issue of, the issue of several million immigrants that are not legally documented. And there are many people who are disturbed by that because it's not legal, they're not legal immigrants, and that there is, we see people crossing the border illegally. But that's another set of issues that's a little bit different than this history, because we never had that. That's kind of unique to our history, to have several million people who are not legally documented. And again, I'm not making a judgment on that. I'm just making a statement that's a fact of history. Now, what we do know is historically, even if they were all legal, many Americans would still have an issue, because there's always been an issue with Americans, not just Americans, but I'm saying in American history, we see that immigrants usually don't get favorable responses. They're not welcomed with open arms. And it takes a certain amount of a challenge from the immigrants to kind of assimilate or to adapt and adopt and to fight hard to get recognized as being legitimately a part of the American landscape. As you'll see, we often now use the term Native American and for the people who lived here before, the indigenous people, and that can be a little bit problematic. Some prefer just to be called American Indian, even though that we all know that was the term Indian came out of misunderstanding of where this continent was, thinking it was India or the Indies. But having said that, there was a Native American Party, was meaning white settlers, mainly white Protestants, seeing themselves as the natives and not accepting people coming over. It's very interesting. And then we deal a lot with labor conflict, and Howard Zinn talks about this. And I just want to point this out. In my US 102 class, we really emphasize a lot of this clash between labor and capital, and the farmer and the worker up against the big man, and this can come off as very like anti-capitalist, anti-establishment, kind of commie socialist rhetoric. And Howard Zinn was a socialist of some branch for sure. Okay. Now, I just want to point out though, without advocating, I'm not advocating socialism or communism, I'm reminding you that socialism and communism were responses to the inequalities that industrialization and capitalism brought. A lot of wealth was generated in unprecedented ways, and over time we've seen a middle class grow, which has seemed to justify, the ends kind of justify the means kind of thing, for a lot of people who are believers in industrialization and capitalism. But we also have to be honest that while it's true that there was a rise of a middle class, that more people could get consumer goods in a way that was unprecedented and benefited, tremendous amount of wealth inequality was also have been created. Still to this day gets created in a capitalist society, and many owners of the means of production don't care about the conditions of their workers. Some do. But the idea of work environments that are healthy and happy came out of this struggle of people actually fighting. In my 102 class, you see that the state, with sometimes police, sometimes private guards, would actually shoot families in coal mines or anybody who tried to protest to get better wages. It was a violent, bloody struggle to get to our workers' rights to where we have now. It didn't come out of a vacuum, is my whole point. And it doesn't mean that I'm trying to promote anti-capitalism or a particular socialist or communist or anarchist idea, because those are all ideas that will kind of often inspired a kind of radical workers' movement. But because of those elements, we do enjoy a much more rational, saner work environment than we saw before. And where we kind of touch on this a little bit in this section. And I just want you to kind of realize that, especially when you're looking in the context of Howard Zinn, that this isn't this is real. So I think that often pro-capitalist side highlights the growth of upward mobility, middle class, and consumerism, consumer goods, and that kind of freedom, the free markets, and they negate the bloody struggle that came before that. And at the same time, many people who fight in the struggle and highlight the evils of capitalism, industrialization, sometimes don't address or admit the fact that capitalism, when it's going well and there's a large middle class and there's upward mobility and all of that a lot of people are very, very happy with that kind of environment as well. So that's the two sides I kind of want you to think about. So we're dealing with a theme, more or less, like in this section. And we don't have a Sunday paper, so as I pointed out. So you should be happy about that. please feel free to give me a call again if you need anything, and I'm hoping you'll find the section is enjoyable, especially as we eventually are sliding into the Civil War at some point. But in the meantime, here we are, and we'll be in touch.